Mara Riker noticed the black SUV before she noticed anything else about the truck stop, and then she forgot about it, which was the first mistake of the night and almost the last one she ever made. She rolled in off Interstate 40 at 2:43 in the morning on a Harley that had seen better decades but still ran like something with a grudge against silence. The engine's growl echoed off the asphalt, scattered a pair of starlings from a power line overhead, and then she killed it, and the desert quiet rushed back in to fill the space. The kind of quiet that existed only between cities where the darkness was thick enough to feel, and the sky was so full of stars it seemed almost excessive. Like someone had overdone it just to make a point. The truck stop existed because Interstate 40 needed somewhere for the weary and the lost to pause between Albuquerque and Amarillo. It was the kind of place that had given up trying to be anything other than what it was. Fluorescent lights buzzed like dying insects above the fuel pumps. The diner windows threw greasy yellow rectangles across the parking lot. 18-wheelers sat in dark rows at the far end, their drivers asleep in cabs that rocked slightly in the desert wind. Everything smelled like diesel and old coffee, and the particular loneliness of places that only existed because people were passing through them on the way to somewhere else. Mara sat on her bike for a moment after shutting it down. Old habit. You did not survive 15 years wearing a Brotherhood patch by walking into unfamiliar territory without taking 30 seconds to read it first. She cataloged two semis running their engines for heat, a battered pickup with Arizona plates parked crooked near the entrance, a minivan with a cracked windshield, and a child's car seat visible through the back window. A man in a gas station attendant's vest leaning against the building with a cigarette burning between his fingers and his eyes on his phone. And in the far corner of the lot, deep in the shadow where the fluorescent reach did not quite stretch, a black SUV. Engine off, windows tinted dark as ink, nobody getting out, nobody going in. Just sitting there with the particular stillness of something that was choosing to be still rather than simply being it. Mara's hand moved automatically toward her belt, toward the knife she had carried for 15 years. Then stopped. She was being paranoid. Black SUVs existed everywhere. People slept in their cars at truck stops all the time. She was tired and she was scared and she was reading threat into ordinary things because her brain needed somewhere to put the fear that had nowhere else to go. 6 weeks until the custody hearing. 6 weeks to prove to a family court judge that a 58-year-old biker grandmother was a better option for Sable than a 35-year-old father who had failed 3 separate rehabilitation programs and currently carried a felony possession charge pending in Bernalillo County. The logical answer was obvious to anyone paying attention. The law was not always paying attention. And Ethan had a lawyer who knew exactly how to weaponize appearance against substance, who could take a leather vest covered in patches and turn it into evidence of danger even when the person wearing it was fighting to protect a child. She climbed off the bike's stretched joints that had been complaining since the Oklahoma Panhandle and pushed through the diner door. Brass bell on a spring. Cheerful sound completely at odds with the 3 in the morning emptiness inside. 2 truckers at the counter, both staring into coffee mugs with the 1,000-yard look of men who had been on the road too long and were surviving on caffeine and stubbornness. A waitress moving between tables with the careful economy of someone conserving energy through a long shift. A cook visible through the service window, a cigarette tucked behind his ear, studying his phone with considerably more interest than the eggs on his griddle deserved. Mara slid into a booth by the window, not to watch her bike, to watch that SUV. Her phone buzzed against her hip. She pulled it out with hands that showed every one of her 58 years. Scarred knuckles from fights she had won and a few she had not. Calluses from decades of gripping handlebars through weather that ranged from desert heat to mountain cold. A thin scar along her right thumb from a night in Flagstaff she did not discuss in polite company. Hands that had changed diapers and thrown punches and braided a little girl's wild auburn hair and done everything in between, all the contradictions of a life lived fully and sometimes badly and always forward. The lock screen photo made her chest tighten the way it always did. Sable, 7 years old, gap-toothed, and impossibly bright-eyed, standing in front of the Harley in an oversized t-shirt that hung to her knees, grinning like she had just discovered the secret to something wonderful. Her eyes had that quality that some children carried, that complete and uncomplicated belief that the world was fundamentally good, that the people who loved her would always be there when it mattered. Mar had been working very hard and at considerable personal cost to make sure that belief stayed intact. The text message was 4 words. Grandma, where are you? Mara's thumb hovered over the keyboard. She started to type, stop, started again. The truth was complicated in ways that a text message could not carry. She was somewhere between Albuquerque and nowhere riding because sitting still felt like surrender, and moving felt like doing something even when there was nothing specific to do. She was running from the fear that she might lose Sable to a father who saw her as leverage as a payday, as access to the trust fund her late husband Roy had established before the cancer finished him 3 years ago. Running from the knowledge that courts might look at her vest and her patches and decide that a grandmother's love counted for less than a father's legal rights, regardless of what that father had done with those rights when he had them. She pocketed the phone without responding, another minute of that belief intact. The waitress appeared beside the booth, 60-something name tag that said Carolyn Eyes, that had the particular quality of people who had worked night shifts long enough to stop being surprised by anything the darkness brought in. She poured coffee without being asked. Good instinct, read the customer. You okay, hon? The question carried no judgment, just the tired kindness of someone who had served coffee to the broken and the running for more years than she probably cared to count. Mara managed something that approximated a smile. Just taking the long way home. Carolyn's expression said she had heard variations of that line roughly 10,000 times and believed exactly none of them, but she moved on without pressing. Some people wanted to talk. Some people wanted to be left alone with their coffee and the 3 in the morning quiet and whatever they were carrying that was too heavy to put down but too familiar to name. Mara wrapped both hands around the mug. Heat through ceramic, grounding, real. She let her gaze drift back to the window, to her Harley sitting under the sick yellow light, and beyond it to that black SUV still unmoving in the corner of the lot. She should trust the instinct. She had been explaining it away for 20 minutes, and it kept returning the way pain did when you stop focusing on something else. Professional positioning. That was what it was. The SUV was angled to provide clear sight lines to the diner entrance, while remaining partially obscured from anyone inside looking out. She had seen that kind of setup before in different contexts in earlier decades, always with the same underlying geometry. People who were very patient and very good at waiting for exactly the right moment to do something very specific to someone specific. Her hand found the knife on her belt. She did not draw it, just touched it, just reminded herself it existed. What she was not ready for was the boy. Callum Merritt had been invisible for so long that he sometimes forgot what it felt like to be seen. 3 months living in the margins of truck stops and rest areas, the cold concrete spaces behind dumpsters where people discarded what they no longer wanted. Learning the rules that nobody taught in school. Be quiet, be small, be nothing worth noticing. He had perfected it the way certain insects perfected camouflage. Not by hiding, but by becoming so completely unremarkable that the eyes of predators slid over him and found nothing to fix on. He was tucked into the narrow gap between the dumpster and the cinder block wall at the back of the truck stop. The smell was severe rotting food and old grease and something chemical underneath that he had stopped trying to identify months ago. But the smell also meant nobody came back here. Nobody wanted to look too closely at the places where the garbage went, which made it ideal for a boy who needed to be nowhere. His backpack sat between his feet. Everything he owned in the world compressed into one bag with a broken zipper and a keychain shaped like a small dinosaur attached to the pull tab. One spare shirt, jeans with a tear at the left knee, socks that had long since abandoned any pretense of being white. A phone with no service plan that he kept charged at library outlets because the photos on it were the only things he owned that could not be replaced. And at the very bottom, wrapped in a plastic grocery bag to protect it from moisture and dirt and the general hostility of the world, a photograph. Iris, his sister, his twin. 8 years old in the photo, which made her 11, now the same age as him, somewhere in the foster system, in a house he did not know the address of, being raised by strangers, while Callum was behind a dumpster in New Mexico, trying to remember what it felt like to sleep without keeping one part of himself alert. They had come into the world 4 minutes apart. Callum first, which he had spent the first 8 years of his life considering a point of pride. 4 minutes of seniority, 4 minutes of being the one responsible. He had not done much with that responsibility the night it mattered most. 3 years since that night. 3 years since he had stood in the doorway of their kitchen while their stepfather Gary did what he did, and Callum's feet refused to obey him, and his voice died somewhere between his chest and his mouth, and his whole body locked up like every circuit had tripped at once. Iris was 7 then, screaming from behind the kitchen table with her hands pressed over her ears, begging it to stop, begging Callum to do something. And Callum had stood in that doorway and done nothing, and would carry that doing nothing like a stone in his chest for the rest of his life, no matter how much else accumulated around it. The social worker came the next day, took one look at the broken furniture, and the blood dried into the linoleum in the careful way their mother moved as if everything hurt, and some things might not heal correctly. Made the decision that split the world in two neat halves that had nothing to do with each other anymore. Iris was young enough, undamaged enough on the surface to be placed quickly with a family that wanted a daughter. Callum was 11, old enough to be considered complicated, old enough to have seen too much, old enough that foster families looked at him and saw a problem with a long timeline rather than a kid who just needed someone to step in. He went back to Gary because the system decided a father with a temper was better than no father at all. He lasted 4 months before he ran, had been running ever since. The October night was cold in the way that New Mexico nights got cold even after days that had been hot enough to distort the air above the asphalt. He pulled his hoodie tighter and watched the parking lot through the gap between the dumpster and the wall, cataloging the way he had learned to catalog everything. Which vehicles had been there more than an hour? Which people were passing through versus staying? Who might notice a homeless kid versus who would look right through him? The black SUV had been there when he arrived nearly 2 hours ago. He had noted it immediately the way he noted anything that did not fit the pattern. Engine off, but not because someone was sleeping inside. The stillness was wrong, too intentional. The stillness of something waiting rather than resting. Windows too dark for a civilian vehicle at a civilian truck stop at this hour. Positioned at an angle that made no sense for someone who just wanted to sleep undisturbed. He had almost moved, found somewhere else to spend the night. But then the woman on the motorcycle had rolled in, and something in the way she carried herself had made him stay and watch. She was older. Maybe his mother's age would have been if things had gone differently. Gray threaded through dark hair pulled back tight. A leather vest covered in patches he recognized from news stories, the kind of stories that told you to be afraid of people who looked like this. But Callum had spent 3 months learning to see past what the surface was designed to communicate. And what he saw in those 30 seconds before she went inside was not what the vest was supposed to mean. He saw the way she sat on the bike for those extra 30 seconds and read the parking lot the same way he read it. Methodical, deliberate. The practiced attention of someone who had learned that 30 seconds of looking could be the difference between a safe night and one that was not. He saw the way her hand moved toward her phone and her shoulders did something complicated and involuntary, like a weight she had been carrying for a long time had shifted but not lifted. He saw her thumb linger on the screen before she put it away. That was a grandmother's gesture. Someone who had people waiting for them. Someone who carried something that mattered more than whatever she was doing out here at 3 in the morning alone. She went inside, sat in the booth by the window, and the SUV doors opened. Both of them. Perfect synchronization. Driver and passenger. 2 men stepping out into the darkness with movements that were too coordinated to be natural, too purposeful to be anything other than rehearsed. These were not tired drivers stretching after a long haul. These were people executing a plan they had gone over until it was automatic. Callum's entire body went cold. Not from the October wind. He had seen that kind of movement before in nature documentaries he had watched at the library on winter afternoons when he needed somewhere warm to sit. The way wolves worked, the way they spread apart and angled towards something creating geometry that removed options before the prey understood that options were being removed. The patience of predators who did not need to rush because they had already done the planning that made speed irrelevant. His survival instinct said, stay down. Every calculation that had kept him alive for 3 months on the street agreed. This was not his business. Getting involved in other people's dangerous situations was how you stopped surviving. He had learned that had paid for the learning with cold nights and hunger and fear that never fully switched off. But the man on the right shifted his jacket and Callum saw the shape beneath it. He had seen that shape before. 3 years ago, kitchen. Gary swinging it in wild arcs while the social worker backed toward the door and their mother pressed herself against the counter. And Iris screamed and Callum stood in the doorway and did nothing and let it happen and had been carrying that doing nothing ever since. The man's hand moved inside his jacket. The woman in the diner had her back to the door, had bent over her coffee. No idea. No time. Stay down. The voice in his head was 3 years of survival compressed into 2 words. This is not your problem. You cannot help. You tried to help once and you froze and nothing changed except that Iris cried for you and you had to live with having frozen. His fingers found the photograph in his pocket, found Iris's face through the fabric without needing to see it, heard her voice from 3 years ago, small and absolutely certain that her big brother could fix things. Callum, do something. Please do something. The gun cleared the jacket. Callum's legs moved before the rest of him caught up. He came out of the shadows running sneakers, slapping wet asphalt, heart hammering so hard he could feel it in his back teeth. Every survival instinct he had developed screamed at him to stop, to turn around, to go back to being invisible and safe and alive. He kept running, straight toward the man with the gun and the woman who did not know death was arriving from behind. The word came out of him like something tearing loose from the place where it had been stuck for 3 years. Gun. One syllable cracked down the middle. 11-year-old vocal cords not designed for the volume of everything he was trying to push through them. But it was enough. The shooter's head snapped toward the sound. The barrel tracked away from the diner window. Time did something strange, slowing and speeding simultaneously, every detail hyper-real and crystalline. The man's face turning, expression shifting from focused calm to irritated confusion. The gun swinging toward Callum instead of the woman. And inside the diner, through the greasy yellow glass, the woman's head coming up, eyes widening, body already moving. The shooter's finger found the trigger. Callum was still running forward, still moving toward the gun, even though it was now pointed at him, because turning back meant going back to being the boy who stood in the doorway, and he would rather catch a bullet moving forward than live one more day inside that particular version of himself. The shot was louder than he expected. The sound bounced off concrete and metal and asphalt and seemed to arrive from everywhere at once. Birds scattered from somewhere overhead. An alarm went off on one of the parked trucks. Then the fire. It detonated through his left side just below his ribs and spun him sideways, feet tangling the parking lot, tilting 90 degrees faster than physics should have allowed. He hit the asphalt with his shoulder and hip pain fracturing through him in waves. And for half a second he thought he had just fallen, just stumbled in the dark and gone down hard. Then the warmth started spreading. He lay on his back and looked up at the parking lot lights and understood what had happened. The warmth was his blood moving outward through fabric, spreading faster than warmth should spread. But he had moved. He had screamed. He had not stood in the doorway. For the first time in 3 years, when Iris's voice had asked him to do something, he had done it. Above him, the lights buzzed and flickered. Little dying stars in a universe that had never particularly noticed whether he existed or not. And he thought not with fear, but with something that felt almost like arriving at a place he had been walking toward for a long time, that at least he knew now. At least he knew he could move when it mattered. Mara moved the instant she heard the word. 15 years of brotherhood training had wired her body to respond to threat before her mind finished processing what kind of threat it was. She dropped below the window line as the first shot punched through the space where she had been sitting, took out a section of the neon sign above the diner, showered her with glass. She was already moving out of the booth, knife in hand, through the door and into the parking lot in one continuous motion that her joints would register their objections to later, if later arrived. The second shooter was coming around the corner of the building. She went at him low and hard shoulder, connecting with his ribs, putting all 135 pounds of her behind it. His shot went into the sky. They hit the asphalt together and she pressed the flat of the blade against his forearm. Not deep, just enough to make the message very clear in the gunfall. The SUV's engine roared. Tires screamed. The first shooter scrambling back inside, clutching something at his wrist. The vehicle fishtailed across the lot and was gone, taillights disappearing onto the interstate ramp at a speed that told her they had an extraction route planned before the night began. She let them go. The boy was on the asphalt 20 feet away. Mara crossed to him at a run and dropped to her knees beside him. He was small, impossibly small for what he had just done. Couldn't be more than 11 or 12. Wearing a hoodie so thin she could see daylight through it in places. Sneakers with the soles beginning to separate. Jeans with dirt ground into the fabric from long nights on hard ground. The kind of kid that the world looked through instead of at. The kind of kid who existed in the peripheral vision of everyone who was busy with something that felt more important. He was staring up at the parking lot lights with eyes that were working very hard to stay focused. Each breath came shallow and sharp. His left side was dark with spreading wetness that looked black under the sodium vapor lights, but that Mara knew the color of. She pressed both hands into the wound hard, the way she had been taught in a first aid class a decade ago that she had never expected to need quite like this. "Stay with me." Her voice came out harder than she intended, the voice she used when someone needed to be in charge and she was the available option. "Look at me. What's your name?" His eyes rolled toward her, struggled to find her face and hold it. His lips moved and the sound that came out was thin, but it was there. "Callum." She filed it away. Made it real. He was a specific person with a name and not an anonymous tragedy. "I'm Mara. You just stepped in front of a bullet for a stranger." Why? The question was not fair. She knew that. But she needed to understand what would make a child throw himself between a gun and a woman he had never met, because understanding it felt important in a way she could not yet fully articulate. Like something she would need to carry carefully if she was going to carry it right. His answer came in fragments, words separated by the effort of breathing around the pain. "Because nobody stepped in for my mom. Because my sister begged me to do something and I froze. Because I've been frozen for 3 years and I couldn't stand one more day of it." Each word landed in Mara like something thrown hard and precisely aimed. She saw it all in the spaces between his sentences. Saw the guilt that children carried when they were put in impossible positions by adults who should have protected them instead. Saw the particular torture of having been paralyzed when someone needed you to move. Saw herself in miniature. Different biography. Same essential shape of wound. "Someone should have stopped it," he said. "For my family." Nobody did. Sirens in the distance. Red and blue light already painting the eastern horizon. Mara leaned forward until her face was close enough to his that he could not look away. Close enough that her words would reach even through the fog that was starting to cloud his focus. "You listen to me, Callum." Her voice dropped to something fierce and deliberate and meant to last. "You didn't save some random stranger tonight. You saved a grandmother. If I died out there, my granddaughter goes back to a father who can't take care of himself, let alone a 7-year-old girl. You didn't just save me. You saved her future. Both of them. All of it." His vision was going. She could see it happening in real time. The edges of his focus softening his skin, going the color of something that had given too much of itself away. But his lips moved one more time. "Did I at least do something right this time?" The voice of a child who had been telling himself for 3 years that he was the kind of person who stood still when it mattered. Mara gripped his hand, kept the other one pressed hard against his side, made absolutely sure he could hear what came next. "You did more than right. You did what most grown men won't. And in my world, that means everything." The paramedics arrived running. Someone in the diner had called the moment the first shot went off. They came with the particular focused chaos of people trained to manage crisis voices, overlapping equipment, rattling hands, reaching. Someone tried to move Mara aside. She made a sound that stopped the attempt immediately. "I've got the bleed. You get the line in." They looked at her hands already doing the work, looked at her face, made the calculation that some arguments were not worth the time. They worked around her, lifted Callum onto the stretcher with care that physics did not cooperate with, and she watched him take the pain of movement inside himself rather than letting it out, swallowing it, absorbing it, which was all wrong. 11-year-old boys should be allowed to scream when they were hurt, should have adults whose function was to make the pain stop rather than cause it. The ambulance doors opened. Mara climbed in without asking permission. "Ma'am," the paramedic's voice had the beginning of an objection in it. "He saved my life." Her voice was quiet and absolute. "That makes him mine. I'm not leaving." The paramedic looked at her vest, at her hands still dark with Callum's blood, made a calculation about which battles were worth the energy. Stay out of the way. She wedged herself into the corner and watched them work. IV line going in, oxygen mask pressure. Bandages, a young paramedic doing everything correctly with the mechanical precision of someone executing training and still unable to guarantee the outcome that the training was designed for. She pulled out her phone. Blood smeared across the screen. She navigated to the contact by feel. Garrett McKay, president of the New Mexico chapter, the man who had given her a patch 15 years ago when she walked into the clubhouse with nothing but bruises and a need to belong somewhere that did not require her to be smaller than she was. The line rang twice. A rough voice answered, thick with sleep. "This better matter. I'm calling the oath." Silence. Then Garrett's voice changed completely. Sleep stripped away like a coat coming off. "You sure we don't invoke that lightly?" Mara looked at the boy on the gurney, pale as something that had given too much of itself away, breathing assisted by a machine, alive because he had decided that moving was worth the cost. "A kid named Callum just took a bullet meant for me. Someone tried to kill me tonight. Professional hit. 2 shooters, black SUV. They knew exactly where I'd be and when." Garrett didn't make it a question. "Ethan. Has to be. Gets me out of the way. Gets Sable. Gets the inheritance and everything Roy built." "Where are you?" "Ambulance heading to Albuquerque Medical. The boy is critical. I'll make the calls." By sunrise, he doesn't wake up alone. "You understand what you're starting, Mara. Once the oath is invoked, the whole Brotherhood knows. This doesn't stay contained." She understood exactly what she was starting. The sacred obligation was not a casual thing. It was a declaration, an announcement to everyone who understood the language that a person outside the Brotherhood had done something so significant they were now inside it permanently, whether they wanted to be or not. That their life was now woven into the fabric of the code. That anyone who came for them came for all of them. It meant Callum would never be invisible again. "Do it." She hung up, reached into her jacket pocket with her free hand. Her fingers found the piece of paper she had grabbed in the chaos of the parking lot when she was moving fast, and her hands were working on instinct, and she had pulled it from the second shooter's jacket without fully consciously deciding to. She unfolded it carefully. The handwriting was neat, precise, the kind of precision that belonged to someone who took their planning seriously. "Eliminate subject. Son inherits estate plus full custody of minor child. Payment on confirmation." Mara read it twice. Let it settle. Her son, the boy she had raised and sat with through 2 rehabilitation programs and paid for a third, and visited in county lockup, and bailed out of situations that would have destroyed someone without a mother fighting for them. Ethan had looked at her and performed the calculation and decided she was worth more to him dead than alive. Had hired professionals to solve that problem cleanly. The rage that moved through her was not the hot kind, not the kind that exploded and made noise. It was the cold, calculating kind that built plans with the same precision as the handwriting on the note, the kind that did not stop. First, she had to make sure this boy lived, had to honor the oath, had to prove that when someone stepped in for you, you did not let it mean nothing. The hospital materialized out of the desert dark, white building against black sky, emergency entrance blazing with light. They wheeled Callum inside at a run. Mara followed until a nurse stepped into her path. Family only past this point. Mara did not hesitate. I'm all he's got. It might have been the most completely honest thing she had said all night. The nurse looked at her, at the vest, at the blood on her hands, at the set of her jaw that indicated this was a conversation with one possible conclusion. Waiting room is through there. We'll find you when we know something. It was not permission, but it was not refusal either. Mara would take it. The waiting room was the particular purgatory that hospitals had been perfecting for decades. Chairs designed to discourage comfort, fluorescent lights at a frequency that made everyone look slightly unwell, a television with the sound off cycling through news that nobody was watching, coffee from a machine in the corner that tasted like regret, dissolved in hot water and served without apology. Mara paced, could not sit. Sitting felt like surrendering to a situation she was supposed to be managing. Her phone buzzed. Garrett, word is out. Brothers rolling. How many do you need? As many as can ride. You'll have them. Sunrise full chapter. Anyone close enough is already moving. She paced and the night moved slowly in the way that nights moved when you were waiting for something that had not happened yet and might go either way. Each minute had the weight of something being decided somewhere out of reach. In an operating room she could not enter by a body she could not help, while she walked the same 20 feet of linoleum over and over and tried to make the waiting feel like doing something. Dawn came through the waiting room windows, gradually light that was afraid of what it might find. Mara watched the sky go from black to deep blue to the tentative gray that preceded actual morning, and outside the parking lot began to fill. Not with cars. They arrived in pairs first, then clusters, then a steady stream that built on itself. Harleys and custom builds, and choppers that sounded like controlled weather chrome and leather, and the particular thunder of engines that had been tuned and retuned over years of hard miles. They parked in neat rows with military precision, each bike placed deliberately, the whole assembly taking on the shape of something organized around a purpose. Mara walked to the window and counted without meaning to. 20, 40, 60, still coming. Men and women swinging off bikes, some of them, with the look of people who had been on the road for hours, some with coffee cups still in hand from wherever they had stopped for fuel. Different chapters, different states, different decades of the same code. A nurse appeared at Mara's shoulder and stared at the parking lot in silence for a long moment. What is happening out there? A sacred obligation, Mara said. For anyone who understood what that meant, it explained everything. Garrett walked through the emergency entrance at 7:15. 62 years old, with more scar tissue than smooth skin and eyes that had absorbed a significant portion of the worst that people could do and had occasionally witnessed something better. He crossed to Mara in 4 strides. How many, she asked. Last count 940. Still climbing. Got brothers from Arizona, Colorado, Texas. Word moves fast when the oath gets called. 940 people for a boy they had never met because one of their own had said he mattered. Mara's eyes burned. She managed it. He's still in surgery. Garrett's jaw set. He's got 940 reasons to make it. A doctor came through the double doors. Young, tired. He scanned the waiting room and Mara was already moving toward him. Callum Merritt. I'm his family. The doctor took in her vest, the dried blood under her fingernails, the complete absence of doubt in her face. He decided not to challenge the claim. He's out of surgery. The bullet went through clean, missed the major organs. We've repaired the damage and given him 2 units of blood. He's stable. Mara heard the word that had not been said yet. She waited. But he's severely malnourished and dehydrated. His immune system was already compromised before tonight. We're keeping him sedated to let his body focus on healing. The next 48 hours are critical. If infection establishes itself, the variables change significantly. Can I see him? The doctor looked out at 940 motorcycles parked in his hospital's lot, made a decision that was going to generate some administrative conversation later. 5 minutes. The ICU was very quiet in the way that spaces full of machines doing critical work were quiet. Callum looked impossibly small in the bed surrounded by equipment that was disproportionately large, all of it keeping him tethered to the side of the line he needed to be on. His skin was pale against white sheets. His chest rose and fell with the machine's rhythm, but it rose and fell. Mara pulled a chair close, took his hand carefully avoiding the IV line. "You're going to make it," she told him. She said it like fact, like her conviction could function as physics. "You're going to wake up and you're going to see something you've probably never seen before in your life. People who gave a damn. People who showed up." She did not know if any part of him could hear. It did not change what needed to be said. "I don't know your whole story yet. Don't know what put you on that street or who failed you or how long you've been surviving it alone. But I know what you did tonight, and I know that what you did created something between us that doesn't expire." Her phone buzzed. Unknown number. "This is Elizabeth Greer from New Mexico Child Protective Services. I've been assigned to Sable Riker's case. I need to speak with you immediately regarding an emergency custody motion filed this morning by Ethan Riker." The words hit like the bullet that had missed her, each one finding its specific target. She stepped into the hallway and dialed. Elizabeth answered on the second ring. "Professional. Careful. Ms. Riker, what motion?" "Ethan Riker filed an emergency petition this morning claiming you were involved in a gang-related shooting. He's arguing that Sable is in immediate danger. A judge has granted a temporary order. Sable has been placed in 72-hour emergency foster care pending a full hearing. He tried to have me killed last night." Mara's voice was flat. "Two professional shooters. The only reason I'm alive is because a homeless boy saw them coming and took a bullet for me." I pulled a note from the shooter's jacket. "Eliminate subject. Son inherits estate plus full custody of minor child." That is not an allegation. That is a document. Silence. "Then carefully, I need to see that note, and I need a full statement. I'm at the hospital with the boy who saved my life. He is 11 years old, and he almost died because my son decided I was worth more gone than present. I'll come to you. Don't leave the hospital. Don't contact Ethan. Don't do anything that could be characterized as aggressive or threatening. The next 72 hours are critical for both situations." The line went dead. 72 hours to build a case that would bury Ethan before a judge made Sable's foster placement permanent, before a 7-year-old girl ran out of faith that the people who loved her were actually coming. Mara's phone buzzed again. "Garrett, news crews just showed up. Someone tipped them about the bikers. They're already framing it as gang activity. This could be used against you in court. Tell everyone to clear out. Last thing I need is footage that gives Ethan's lawyer ammunition." Brief silence. "You sure we came for you, for the kid? I know, and I'm grateful. But the best thing right now is to not hand them the narrative they're looking for." "All right, we'll roll. But Mara, the protection doesn't expire because it's inconvenient. That boy's under the oath. So are you. Ethan comes at either of you again, he comes through all of us." She put the phone away and walked back to Callum's room, stood in the doorway, looked at him in the blue-white light of the machines, this child who had been invisible to the world for 3 months and had announced his existence in the loudest possible way at the worst possible moment and somehow survived it. She was done playing defense. She had spent 3 years fighting Ethan through proper channels, being measured and respectable and everything a family court wanted a grandmother to look like. Ethan had responded by hiring killers. It was time to stop playing by rules that kept changing depending on who was making them. She walked back to his bedside, sat down, and took his hand again. "Rest," she said quietly. "Heal. When you wake up, I'll still be here. And we're going to show them what happens when they underestimate people who've got nothing left to lose except each other." Outside, the sound of 940 engines turning over one by one filled the desert morning, a rolling thunder that moved through the hospital walls and into the floor, and up through the chair legs and into Mara's bones. She felt it the way she felt everything important. Not with her ears, with the part of her that had been built over decades to recognize the sound of people choosing to show up. They pulled out in a slow, controlled procession. The ground still vibrated with the memory of them long after the last taillight disappeared onto the interstate. The parking lot went quiet. The note in Mara's jacket pocket went nowhere. The 72-hour clock was already running, and somewhere across the city in a courtroom that did not yet know what was coming for it, a 7-year-old girl with auburn hair and a gap-toothed smile was waiting for the grandmother who had promised in 100 small ways over 1,000 ordinary days that she would always come. Mara intended to keep that promise. Whatever it cost, whatever it required, whatever version of herself she had to become between this moment and the moment she walked through that courtroom door. Hold on, Sable. Grandma's coming. Callum woke to pain. Not the sharp, specific kind that the bullet had been. That had a location and a cause and a moment of origin. This was diffuse and deep, a grinding ache that lived in the left side of his body and pulsed with every heartbeat like a tenant who had moved in uninvited and was not planning to leave quickly. White ceiling. Machines making sounds that meant things he did not know how to read. A smell of antiseptic working hard to cover something organic underneath. Blankets that were heavy and clean and warm in a way that took him several seconds to identify because he had not experienced it in long enough that his body needed a moment to remember what it was. Easy, Mara's voice low and certain. You've got stitches and staples holding you together. Sudden movement is a bad idea right now. He turned his head slowly. She was in the chair beside the bed, exactly where she had been when he lost consciousness in the ambulance. Or maybe she had never moved. Or maybe she had moved and come back. She still had the leather vest on, still had the road-worn look of someone who had not slept, but her eyes were sharp and present in a way that indicated she had made a decision about what came next and was ready to talk about it. How long, he asked. 36 hours since surgery. You've been in and out, mostly out. The doctors say you're going to make it. She paused. You had 940 people show up to make sure you didn't wake up alone. Callum processed that number, could not fit it into any framework that made sense. Why? Because I called in an oath. In my world, that's a promise that has weight. You saved my life. Where I come from, that creates a debt that people take seriously. 940 people showing up to sit in a hospital parking lot is what that looks like in the early stages. Early stages. We have problems, Mara said. Both of us. And I need your help if you're willing to give it. He should have said no. 3 months on the street had produced a very functional set of rules about not getting further involved in other people's dangerous situations. Every one of those rules applied here. But Iris's face was in his head, and the feeling from the parking lot was still in his body somewhere underneath the pain, the feeling of finally moving when it mattered, of finally being the version of himself he had wanted to be for 3 years. He was not ready to give that back. What kind of problems? Mara told him everything. Ethan's attempt on her life, Sable in emergency foster care, the 72-hour clock that had been burning while Callum was unconscious, a hitman named Cade Voss still somewhere in the city, a custody hearing that would determine whether a 7-year-old girl grew up with someone who loved her or someone who saw her as leverage. When she finished, Callum was quiet for a while, working through it the way he had learned to work through situations that had multiple moving pieces, identifying angles and pressure points, and what information would change the picture. You need evidence, he said. Audio or video, something a court can use. Your word against Ethan's attorney without it. That's where you come in. Callum looked at her. You spent 3 months being invisible, moving through the world without being noticed. I need those skills. I need someone who can get close to Ethan without him knowing it. You want me to follow your son. I want you to help me protect my granddaughter. She showed him the photo on her phone. Sable gap-toothed and grinning, completely unaware that the world contained people who saw her as a financial instrument. She's 7. She's with strangers right now, wondering if I forgot about her. Callum looked at the photo, saw Iris underneath it. If I help you, he said, you help me find my sister. Mara did not pause. Done. There's more. Callum kept his voice level. If Ethan or his people figure out what I'm doing if it goes wrong, I need to know someone's watching. Full weight of the brotherhood. Mara said it the way you stated a fact about the physical world, the way you told someone the floor was solid or the door was locked. Not a promise about intention, a statement about what existed. Anyone who touches you answers to everyone. That's what the oath means. It does not have exceptions. Okay, Callum said. Tell me what you need. Nora Strand arrived an hour later with a laptop bag and the focused energy of someone who had been awake for the same 36 hours as Mara and had spent them doing useful work. Mid-40s, red hair going silver at the temples, tattoos on both forearms in designs too detailed to read quickly. She moved with the economical awareness of someone trained somewhere that had taught her to understand the architecture of every room she entered. She studied Callum with the same comprehensive attention she probably gave electronics she was about to work with. Heard you took a bullet for Diesel. Diesel, Mara said from the corner. Road name. On the bike, she's Diesel. Earned it riding 400 miles through a desert sandstorm to get to her husband before the cancer took him. Made it with 20 minutes to spare. Nora looked at Callum. You earned something too with what you did in that parking lot. But road names come when you're patched in. Right now, you're Callum. I don't want a patch. Didn't say you did. The protection's yours regardless. The oath isn't something you can return. Nora opened the laptop. Ethan Riker. She pulled up files that indicated significant preparation. Creature of habit. Meets his supplier every Tuesday and Friday at a bar called the Dusty Boot on Central. Attorney on Wednesday mornings. Girlfriend's apartment Thursday nights in the South Valley. She looked up. I've been building this since Mara called the oath. You need to know your problem before you can solve it. Can we prove he hired the shooters, Callum asked. Not yet. That's the gap you're going to help us close. You follow Ethan. Document meetings. Record what you can. Close enough to hear far enough to be furniture. Think you can do that? Callum thought about 3 months of being furniture, of learning which angles made him visible and which made him part of the background that eyes moved across without stopping. Yeah, I can do that. Good, because the hearing on Sable's placement has been moved up, less than 48 hours. We need something concrete before Ethan's lawyer files the motion to make the foster placement permanent. Garrett had been standing against the wall through most of this. He stepped forward now and pulled a small box from his jacket. Inside was a patch black leather with embroidered text in white thread. Under protection. You wear this visible, Garrett said. Anyone in our world sees it, they know what it means. Touching you means war. It's not full membership, but it's a shield. And given what you're about to walk into, you need one. Callum took the patch. It was heavier than it should have been for its size. I don't have a jacket. Nora reached into her bag, pulled out a worn denim jacket with the slightly faded quality of something that had been stored carefully for years. This belonged to my brother before he died. Been in a box for 12 years. He was about your size. She paused. I think he'd have wanted it used for something that mattered. The jacket fit. Mara sewed the patch onto the back, each stitch deliberate and permanent. When she finished, she stepped back and looked at him with an expression that was difficult to categorize, but felt like something being officially acknowledged. Looks right, she said quietly. Before Callum could respond, Mara's phone rang. She stepped into the hallway. Her voice dropped too low to hear, but when she came back, something had shifted in the set of her jaw. Nora. Callum watched her face. What was that, Elizabeth Greer? CPS. The 72-hour window closes sooner than we thought. Ethan's attorney filed a supplemental motion this morning using the news footage from the hospital parking lot. She looked at Garrett. 940 bikers surrounding a medical facility framed as a show of force. The judge is considering making the foster placement permanent before the full hearing. How soon, Garrett asked. Hearing's been moved to tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Nora did not look up from her laptop. We don't have the evidence yet. Then we move tonight. Mara's voice carried the particular flatness of someone who had run all the calculations and arrived at the only remaining option. She looked at Callum. Are you cleared to travel? The doctor said short distances. A 3-block walk counts as short. Callum sat up slowly, absorbing the complaint from his left side without letting it show on his face. The pain was real, but it was manageable, and manageable was enough. Tell me where we're going. That afternoon, Mara dropped Callum 2 blocks from the dusty boot and parked her bike at the far end of the lot with clear sightlines to the entrance. Nora had spent 40 minutes fitting Callum with equipment that should not have existed outside of a federal evidence locker. A recording device built into a button on the denim jacket, a GPS tracker sewn into the lining, a panic bracelet designed to look like a charity fundraiser ribbon. Everything undetectable at casual inspection. Everything functional. You are the witness, not the catch. Nora had said adjusting the button with the precision of someone who had done this before in contexts she did not discuss. You see something, you hit the bracelet. We're 90 seconds away. Your job is to hear and record, not to engage. Do you understand the difference? Callum understood the difference. He had been practicing it for 3 months. Hear everything, respond to nothing, stay invisible. The only new variable was the button and the bracelet, and the knowledge that 90 seconds away was not the same as being alone. He walked the remaining distance with his hands in the jacket pockets, and every skill he had developed for being unremarkable fully engaged. The dusty boot was the kind of bar that had been exactly what it was for 30 years and had no intention of becoming something else. Dim lighting, booths with cracked vinyl, a jukebox in the corner playing something slow and sad that nobody was listening to. The smell of old beer and the particular staleness of a space where the windows had not been opened since the previous decade. Ethan Riker was easy to find, 35 years old but reading closer to 50. The particular toll of methamphetamine and cascading bad decisions was written in everything from his posture to his skin to the jittery over-alertness of his movements. He sat in a back booth, eyes tracking the room with the nervous precision of someone who expected to be watched without understanding that the most effective surveillance looked like a kid with a phone. Callum slid into a booth 2 rows away and did what 11-year-olds did in public spaces. He took out the phone with no service plan, held it at the angle that suggested he was watching something, and let his eyes go soft and unfocused while his ears did the work. The transaction Ethan completed in the first 5 minutes was exactly what it looked like. Envelope for a small package. Neither party making prolonged eye contact. Standard. Unremarkable. The kind of exchange that happened in 100 bars across Albuquerque on any given Tuesday, and the recording device in Callum's button captured every word of the nothing they said to each other. Then a second man walked in, and Callum recognized him immediately from Mara's description. Average height, a face engineered for being difficult to remember accurately. The kind of presence that did not draw attention because it had learned very specifically how not to. But the eyes were something else. Cold with the professional coldness of someone who had learned to turn off the specific parts of himself that made things personal. He moved across the bar with the unhurried economy of someone who had already decided what the outcome of the next 10 minutes was going to be and was simply arriving at it. Cade Voss, the hitman who had missed. He slid into the booth across from Ethan without greeting, without any of the social performance that marked ordinary human interaction. Just sat down and looked at Ethan with those eyes that had the temperature of something kept in a dark place. Their conversation lasted 7 minutes. Callum caught every word through the audio pickup. Ethan's voice carried the whine of someone who had never been told no long enough to develop the capacity for it. She survived. You said it was handled. Voss completely flat. The situation was complicated by an unanticipated variable. The job isn't finished. Delayed, Ethan said, quieter now, leaning forward. How much more? Another 20,000. Half up front. I don't have that kind of liquid cash right now. Then find it. Or explain to the people you owe why you can't. Your choice. A pause. Then Ethan's voice dropping to something uglier, something that had the quality of an idea forming in real time without the filter of better judgment. What about the kid? The one who took the bullet? What about him? He's nobody. No documentation. No family looking for him. Voss, if she's protecting him, that means she cares about him. We use that. She'll do what I want if she thinks it costs him something. Voss was quiet for a moment. Using a child creates complications. He's a homeless kid. Nobody's going to miss him. Could be leverage. Could be insurance. Make her understand that fighting me has a price she can't afford. He paused. Give me 24 hours. Put something together that makes it real. Something she can't ignore. Voss was quiet for long enough that Callum thought the conversation might be over. Then I'll look at the options. But Ethan, after this, we're done. I don't do open-ended arrangements. They left separately. Ethan first pulling on a jacket that had cost more than it should have given what he owed. Voss 5 minutes later walking out with the unhurried pace of someone who had done this many times before and expected to do it several more times before he was finished. Callum waited until both were gone. Then he pressed the panic bracelet. Mara was there in 80 seconds. He played the recording through her earpiece standing in the alley behind the dusty boot. Watched her face go through the particular stillness that faces went to when containing something that would be dangerous if it got out unmanaged. She listened to Ethan's voice ordering harm to an 11-year-old child with the focused attention of someone memorizing coordinates. When it finished, she pulled the earpiece out and held it in her closed fist for a moment. Garrett's place, she said. Now. The chapter clubhouse was a converted warehouse on the industrial edge of the city. Inside it looked like the intersection of someone's lived-in space and a location that had thought carefully about certain kinds of contingencies. Pool table. A bar that predated most of the members. Couches that had survived through sheer stubbornness. Garrett was waiting with 15 others, a cross-section of the chapter unified by the same code and the same expression of controlled readiness. Mara played the recording, the silence after it landed with weight. Garrett broke it. That simplifies things. They come for the boy. We have justification to resolve this permanently. No. Mara's voice cut through the beginning of agreement around the room. We do this smart and legal. We use the recording as evidence. Law enforcement, proper channels. An older member with a scar bisecting his left cheek spoke up. The same system that put a 7-year-old with her addict father in the first place. That system. The system that's watching us right now looking for an excuse to confirm every story they already want to tell about us. Mara held his eyes. I want Ethan gone, but not if it costs Sable in the process. We play this smart or we don't play at all. Garrett nodded slowly. She's right. We go in loud, we confirm the narrative. We go in smart, we write a different one. What's the play? We let them try to take Callum. Nora said it with the measured quality of someone presenting a logistical option. We control the situation. Wire him, track him, have people positioned, record everything. Get Voss on camera admitting to the attempted murder. Get Ethan on camera ordering it. Give the DA something they cannot ignore. You're using the boy as bait. Garrett said it without accusation. Just naming what it was. I'm giving him a choice. Those are different things. Mara looked at Callum. You don't have to do this. We can keep you safe until the hearing. But if you're willing to help, we can end this permanently. Ethan never threatens Sable again. Never threatens you again. Callum thought about Iris, about the difference between being safe and being free, about a 7-year-old girl with a gap-toothed grin who deserved better than a father who saw her as currency. I'll do it. He paused. But I want something in return. Before any of this happens, I want to know where Iris is. I want to know she's safe. That's the condition. Mara looked at Nora. Nora was already typing. Give me an hour. They spent that hour preparing. Nora reconfigured the equipment from the afternoon surveillance, adding a secondary audio channel and a GPS beacon powerful enough to penetrate the industrial walls of the warehouse districts on the city's south end. Garrett positioned his people, placing riders at 4 elevated points around the Maverick Motel on Central, establishing 2-minute response teams, building the net that would make reaching Callum require going through a significant portion of the Brotherhood first. Nora found Iris with 40 minutes to spare. She pulled a chair up beside Callum and opened her laptop without preamble. Your sister, Iris Merritt, Santa Fe foster home run by a woman named Ruth Hayden. Been there 4 months. Before that, 6 different placements in 3 years. Callum's chest tightened. He kept his face even. Is she safe? No abuse flags. Hayden has a clean record. She's known in the system as one of the good ones. But Iris has stopped trying to connect, keeps to herself, stops talking when things start to feel real. Nora's voice softened slightly. The file describes her as having attachment difficulties. Callum knew what that looked like from the inside. He had built the same walls after Gary, after the system, after the fourth and fifth and sixth time. An adult had promised something and then revised what that promise had meant. He thought about the file description for a moment longer. Attachment difficulties. He knew exactly what that looked like, built from the inside out. Walls that went up fast and came down slow, if they came down at all. Each new placement adding another layer of reasons not to let anyone in. Can I see her? Not yet. But after this is done, after we get Sable back, we go to Santa Fe together. That's the deal. You help us, we help you. She paused. All of us. He nodded, thought about Iris behind those walls waiting for someone who had already been too long in arriving. That night, Mara moved Callum to the Maverick Motel at 1 in the morning. The room smelled like accumulated poor decisions and the ghost of cigarettes from a decade ago when you could still smoke inside. Nora had wired it before they arrived. Cameras in the smoke detector and the bedside lamp. Audio pickup sensitive enough to record a conversation across the room. The angles covered every possible entry point. A Brotherhood member named Scarlett positioned herself in the parking lot with a motorcycle and instructions to look inattentive. She was neither. Scarlett had 20 years of road experience and a particular gift for making herself appear to be doing nothing while doing several things simultaneously. You see him coming, you hit the panic button before he reaches the door, she told Callum. You are the witness. Let us do the catching. Callum had waited in worse places for worse things with less reason to believe it would end well. This was different. This time the waiting had a purpose and people on the other side of it. He held that thought like ballast and kept his breathing slow and his hands still and his mind on Iris in Santa Fe and Sable in a stranger's house and the reason this particular night was worth whatever it was going to cost. The door came in at 2 in the morning, not opened, kicked, hard enough to splinter the frame, hard enough to announce that the person on the other side had not come to negotiate. Kate Voss came through in one continuous motion gun, already out scanning the room with the practiced speed of someone for whom this sequence had become automatic through repetition. He found Callum. His expression was the professional version of unsurprised. Nothing personal, kid. Voss moved across the room with the economy of someone who never wasted motion. Wrong place, wrong circumstances. You have a value and I have a problem. That's the whole equation. Callum's hand moved toward the panic button. Voss was faster. He crossed the remaining distance before the hand arrived, took Callum's wrist with a grip that communicated exactly how much it could increase if necessary. The bracelet fell to the floor. Nice instinct. But I've been doing this long enough to recognize the shape of a setup. He produced zip ties with the ease of someone for whom zip ties were standard equipment, secured Callum's wrist behind his back with efficient practice movements. Then he crossed to the window and made a specific hand signal into the parking lot darkness. Callum heard the sound from outside, a single sharp impact. Scarlet. Then silence. The white panel van idled near the exit. Voss walked Callum out through the ruined door frame across the parking lot into the van. Pulled the sliding door shut. The driver, someone Callum had never seen, pulled out immediately. No waiting, no hesitation, a route already decided. Through the recording device still running in the jacket lining, Callum heard Nora's voice in the receiver tucked behind his ear. Clear and steady, the voice of someone who had planned for exactly this contingency. We have your location. Units are moving. 2 minutes. Stay calm. Do not engage. Let it play. The van drove for 4 minutes and stopped in an industrial area. A warehouse district empty at this hour, every building dark, every sound returning to itself once before it faded. Voss walked Callum through a side door into a space that smelled like machine oil and cold concrete, and the kind of silence that accumulated in places where nothing good happened. He secured Callum to a support pillar with a second set of zip ties, checked the bindings, stepped back, pulled out his phone and typed a message without looking at Callum, the focused attention of someone completing a task. Then he looked up. "I know you're wired." He said it without anger, without accusation, just as a statement of fact. "I found the button transmitter when I took your wrist. The GPS in the lining I left because I want them to find us. I want an audience for what comes next." He showed Callum the screen of his phone, a message already drafted, already sent. "You have 6 hours. Drop the custody case. Tell the court you're unfit. Give Ethan what he wants. Or I leave the boy somewhere, she'll find him eventually." He set the phone in his jacket pocket and looked at Callum with eyes that were doing something more complicated than the professional coldness they had carried in the dusty boot. Then he made a call, held the phone slightly away from his ear. "Got the kid. Send the message to the grandmother. 6 hours. A pause. Then Ethan's voice through the speaker, loud enough for the room to hear it, loud enough for the recording device to capture every word in perfect clarity. "Good. Make sure she knows you mean it. I want her to understand that fighting me has a cost. Do something that shows it's real. Something she can't explain away." Voss was quiet for a moment. The pause was brief, but it was there. "I'll handle it. Have the money ready." He hung up, stood still in the center of the warehouse with the phone in his hand, and looked at Callum with an expression that had shifted in some way that was difficult to name but impossible to miss. The professional neutrality was still there, but something underneath it had moved. "How old are you?" he asked. 11. "You have a sister." It was not a question. Callum understood that Voss had done his research, the same kind of preparation that had let him read the motel setup and neutralize Scarlett before she knew he was there. "Twin sister," Callum said. "She's in foster care in Santa Fe. We've been separated for 3 years." Voss was quiet long enough that the silence had texture. He walked to the far wall, stood with his back to Callum for a moment, then turned around. "I had a daughter. Her name was Vanessa. She was 9 when she died. Wrong place, wrong time, wrong street, at the wrong moment." He looked at his hands. "Nothing personal. That's what they always say. Nobody is ever sorry about the things they did that were nothing personal." Callum said nothing. Let the silence do what it was doing. "I spent 12 years after that taking jobs like this one. Told myself that if I couldn't save her, at least I could be useful at something. Told myself the world was the way it was, and the only honest thing was to stop pretending otherwise." He looked at Callum with those eyes that had been cold all evening and were doing something more complicated now. "The man who hired me. He has a daughter, 7 years old. He is trying to get custody of her not because he loves her, but because she has a financial value to him," Sable, Callum said. Voss's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "That's the part I didn't account for carefully enough when I took the job." He paused. "A father willing to pay to take a little girl away from the grandmother who loves her, using a child to do it." Callum looked at him directly, the same thing that happened to Vanessa. Someone decided their business was worth more than her life. The warehouse was very quiet. Outside, Callum could hear nothing. But he knew from Nora's voice in the receiver, from the GPS still running in the jacket lining, that 90 seconds away had become something considerably closer, that the net was already drawn tight, that the only remaining question was what happened in this warehouse before the door came in. He thought about the kitchen doorway 3 years ago, about the moment before his feet had refused to move, about what it had felt like to have the capacity to act and find it locked somewhere inside himself where he could not reach it. He thought about the parking lot, about what it had felt like to find it unlocked. He looked at Cade Voss, a man who had been locking something inside himself for 12 years, and asked the only question that mattered. "You said you spent 12 years trying to fill the space." He kept his voice level, kept it honest, kept it free of anything that sounded like strategy. "Has it worked?" Voss did not answer immediately. The non-answer was its own answer. "Then you already know what I know," Callum said. "Standing still doesn't fill anything. It just makes the space bigger. Voss looked at him for a long time, long enough for the warehouse to settle around them, long enough for whatever was working behind those professional eyes to work its way through to somewhere that could act on it. Then he looked at the gun in his hand, at Callum zip-tied to the pillar, at the phone in his pocket with the message already sent and the money already promised, and the 12 years of accumulated decisions that had brought him to this specific warehouse on this specific night to do this specific thing to this specific child. He set the gun on the concrete floor, stepped back from it, raised his hands. "All right," he said. His voice had the quality of a decision that could not be reversed, and he seemed to understand that and to have made it anyway. "I'll give you what you need, but I want a deal in writing before I say anything else. And I want to know the girl is going to be all right. The 7-year-old. The warehouse door came in a moment later, a controlled breach that cleared the entrance in one sharp motion. Garrett's people came through in the gap with the coordinated precision of individuals who had done this before in contexts where hesitation was a problem. They swept the space, found Voss with his hands raised and the gun on the floor and Callum secured to the pillar and held every variable in place while the situation finished arriving at what it had been moving toward. Mara walked through last. She took in the room in 2 seconds. Voss with his hands up, the gun on the concrete, Callum alive conscious looking at her with the steady eyes of someone who had just done something and understood what it had cost. She crossed to Callum first, pulled the knife from her belt, and cut the zip ties with 3 precise movements. His hands came forward and he held them in front of him for a moment, feeling the circulation return. "You okay?" she asked. "Yeah." She looked at him for a moment longer, reading what his face was telling her, then turned to Voss. 2 words, no particular emphasis. "Let him go." Voss met her eyes. "I already did." The room absorbed that. "I want a deal," Voss said. "Written signed DA's office. Complete cooperation in exchange for reduced charges. I'll give you everything. The initial contact, the meetings, the payment structure. Ethan's instructions, all of it." Mara looked at him for a long moment. "You're going to tell them about Vanessa too," she said. "Not as part of the deal, just because it's true and it matters." Something moved through Voss's face that had not been there when he came through the motel door. "Yeah," he said. "I will." Mara nodded once. Then she looked at Garrett at Nora with her laptop already open at the room full of people who had come through a warehouse door at 2 in the morning because one of their own had called and the code said you came. "Get the DA on the phone," she said. "We're going in tonight." She turned back to Callum. Put one hand on his shoulder, brief and firm, the way you touch someone to confirm they were real and present and still here. "You did something tonight that most adults couldn't have done," she said quietly. "Holding still when it mattered. Saying the right thing at the right moment. That's a different kind of courage than running toward a gun." And it worked. Callum looked at the gun on the concrete floor, at the space where Voss had been standing when he set it down. He was thinking about Iris, about the walls she had built through 6 different placements in 3 years, about what it was going to take to reach through those walls to the sister who was still on the other side of them, waiting for someone who had already been too long in arriving. "We go to Santa Fe after," he said. "That's still the deal." Mara's hand was still on his shoulder. "That's still the deal," she said. "We handle tonight first. Then we go get your sister." Outside, the desert held its cold and its silence and its vast indifference to the small, urgent dramas of human lives playing out across its surface. Somewhere 300 miles north in a house in Santa Fe that smelled like someone else's cooking and someone else's detergent. A girl named Iris Merritt was either asleep or awake, and in either case was carrying the same weight her brother had been carrying for 3 years. The weight of waiting for someone who had promised, in the only way an 8-year-old could promise, to come back. The van's engine was still running in the parking lot. The warehouse smelled like machine oil and the aftermath of decisions being made. Nora was already on the phone with the DA's office, her voice low and precise, laying out what they had and what they needed. Callum picked up his jacket from where it had fallen when Voss removed the zip ties. Put it on. Felt the weight of it, the worn denim and the patch on the back, and the recording device still running in the button, still capturing everything. He had walked into this warehouse as bait. He was walking out as something else. He was not sure yet what to call it, but he recognized the feeling. Had felt the first edge of it in the parking lot outside the truck stop when his legs had moved before his mind gave them permission. Had felt it again in this warehouse when he had looked at a man with a gun and found something to say that mattered more than anything strategy could have produced. It was the feeling of not being frozen anymore. Of being, for the first time in 3 years, the version of himself that Iris had believed in when she was 7 years old and had no reason not to believe. He followed Mara out of the warehouse into the cold October night, toward the cars that would take them to the DA's office, and the evidence that would take them to the courtroom, and the courtroom that would take them eventually to Sable, and then to Santa Fe, and then to whatever came after. He did not look back at the warehouse. There was nothing behind him worth looking at anymore. The police station at 4 in the morning processed what they brought with the focused efficiency of institutions that recognized when something significant had arrived. Nora's recordings were clear. Ethan's voice on the audio ordering harm to an 11-year-old child was the kind of evidence that reorganized calendars around itself. The button transmitter from the Dusty Boot had captured every word of the conversation between Ethan and Voss with the clean fidelity of equipment built for exactly this purpose. The warehouse recording added another layer, Ethan's voice through the phone speaker instructing Voss to make it real. To do something she cannot explain away, landing with the particular weight of words spoken by someone who believed he was beyond consequence. Cade Voss talked for 3 hours. He gave them the initial contact through an intermediary whose name and address he provided without hesitation. He gave them the meetings, the payment structure, the specific language of the arrangement. The note Mara had pulled from the first shooter's jacket, which Voss confirmed as authentic and consistent with the instructions he had been given. He gave them Ethan's communications, the calls, the texts. The escalating pressure after the truck stop had failed to produce the outcome Ethan had paid for. He gave them everything with the methodical precision of someone who had spent 12 years being thorough in his work and was applying that same thoroughness to dismantling it. He told them about Vanessa too, not as part of the deal, just because Mara had said it mattered, and somewhere in that warehouse he had decided she was right. The DA on call reviewed what was there and understood immediately what she was looking at. The warrant was signed at 6 in the morning. Ethan Riker was arrested at 6:15 at his girlfriend's apartment in the South Valley, still half asleep when the officers arrived, confused about what was happening, until they were most of the way through reading him his rights. Conspiracy to commit murder, solicitation of murder, child endangerment, kidnapping. Ethan was not walking away from that list. The kind of charges that closed doors and did not open them again. Mara was not there for the arrest. She was already somewhere else. At 7:30, she sat in a booth at a diner 6 blocks from the courthouse and drank coffee she did not taste and looked at the note she had carried in her jacket pocket since the truck stop parking lot. The handwriting was still neat, still precise. It had not changed. What had changed was her understanding of how long it had been in existence. How many days Ethan had carried this decision before he acted on it. How many mornings he had woken up in the apartment she had helped him pay for and looked at the world through the calculation that his mother was worth more gone than present. She folded the note and put it back in her pocket. Evidence, the DA needed it. She would hand it over at the hearing. She called Garrett. He answered on the first ring. "It's done," she said. "I know, word travels. How are you?" She thought about the honest answer to that question. Thought about Sable in a stranger's house, waking up to another morning of wondering. Thought about Callum sitting in the passenger seat of Nora's car in the hospital parking lot right now, cleared for short travel, holding himself carefully around the left side where the stitches were waiting for what came next. "I'll be better at 9:15, she said. Garrett made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but had the quality of one. "We'll be watching." At 8:45, Mara walked into family court. She had stopped at the hospital first. Callum was awake, sitting up better than he had been at 4 in the morning. The color had returned to his face in the tentative way that color returned when a body had decided to keep investing in itself. She had sat with him for 20 minutes and told him what had happened, told him about the warrant about Ethan, about the DA's assessment of the evidence, and watched his face process it with the careful attention of someone who had learned not to let hope move too fast. Is Sable going to be okay, he asked. That was the first question. Not about himself, not about what came next for him, but about the 7-year-old girl he had met only through a photograph on a phone screen. That's what I'm going in there to make sure of. He looked at her for a moment. Go then. I'll be here. She had kissed his forehead. The gesture surprised both of them. She did not apologize for it. The courtroom had absorbed decades of human difficulty and showed it in the wood grain, in the flat light, in the particular smell of old paper mixed with floor wax that existed nowhere except in places where decisions were made that people had to live with afterward. Elizabeth Greer from Child Protective Services sat in the gallery with a folder on her lap that contained the morning's developments. She had been awake since 5, coordinating with the DA's office, updating the file, making sure the record reflected what the night had produced. She caught Mara's eye as Mara walked in and gave a single nod that carried considerable information. Ethan's attorney was already at the defense table. Mid-50s, the expensive suit and the practiced composure of someone who made a living turning complexity into narrative and narrative into outcomes. He had built a career on knowing which details to emphasize and which to bury. He looked at Mara's vest as she took her seat and made the kind of calculation that Mara had been watching men like him make for 15 years. She let him make it. Let him believe what the vest was supposed to mean. The judge entered at 8:58. She was a woman in her 60s with the contained precision of someone who had been on the bench long enough to have developed strong opinions about how people behaved in her courtroom and the authority to enforce them. She sat, reviewed the materials before her, and was quiet for long enough that the room became very still. Then she looked up. I've reviewed the emergency motions filed by both parties, the police reports filed this morning, the warrant executed at 6:15, and the sworn statement provided by Cade Voss to the district attorney's office. She set the papers down with deliberate care. I've also reviewed the audio recordings submitted as evidence by the prosecution. Ethan's attorney began to rise. Sit down, Mr. Weller. The judge's voice had the quality of something that did not need to be raised to be heard in every corner of the room. You'll have an opportunity to speak. This is not that opportunity. Weller sat. The judge looked at Mara. Ms. Riker, you came into this courtroom 6 weeks ago as a grandmother asking a judge to look past what you were wearing and pay attention to what you were doing. She paused. This court did not do that as well as it should have. She let that sit for a moment in the flat light of the room. Ethan Riker's petition for custody is denied. His petition for emergency placement modification is denied. His parental rights are suspended pending the outcome of criminal proceedings, which, given the evidence before me this morning, I expect will be extensive. She turned to Elizabeth Greer. Ms. Greer, please arrange for Sable Riker to be returned to her grandmother's care immediately. Not this afternoon, immediately. Greer was already reaching for her phone. The judge looked back at Mara. The contained outrage of someone who had been on the bench long enough to have standards and had just watched them get violated in a specific and documented way was present in her face, organized and precise and directed with full intention. This court apologizes that these circumstances were allowed to develop to this degree. You should not have had to do what you did last night to protect your family. She paused, but the record will reflect that you did it and that you did it correctly, and that the outcome is what it is in no small part because of your efforts. Mara nodded once, did not speak. Save the release for somewhere, it would not be misread as anything other than what it was. Outside in the hallway, Greer caught her before she reached the door. I'll have Sable ready for pickup in 2 hours. She paused. She's been asking for you every single day. Told everyone in that house that her grandmother was coming. Told them you always come. Mara's throat tightened in a way she had been managing since the truck stop parking lot, and was not going to stop managing now, not here, not in this hallway with its fluorescent lights and its institutional carpet, and Greer watching her with the careful attention of a professional who had seen many versions of this moment. "Tell her I'm already on my way," she said. She went back to the hospital first. Callum was awake, sitting up the nurse, having decided to allow it in measured increments. Nora was in the corner with her laptop. Garrett was standing by the window looking at the parking lot with the expression of a man who was thinking about several things simultaneously and had reached a comfortable conclusion about all of them. Mara told Callum what had happened, watched his face. "What happens to me now?" he asked. His voice was careful in the way it was careful when something mattered more than he wanted to show. "I filed for emergency guardianship of you last night while the DA was processing Voss." Greer co-signed the application. She paused. "The paperwork will take time to formalize. But you're not going back to the street and you're not going back to Gary. You're coming home with Sable and me if that's what you want." He was quiet long enough that she let the silence do what it needed to do. "And Iris," he said finally. His voice had changed slightly on the name, softened in a way that the rest of his voice had not. "We go to Santa Fe as soon as you're cleared to travel." Mara said it the way she said things she intended to keep. "She's next." Callum looked at his hands. The IV had been removed an hour ago. The bandaging on his left side was visible at the edge of the hospital gown. He looked like what he was, a kid who had been through something significant and was still in the early hours of understanding what came after it. "Why are you doing this?" he asked. "You didn't know me 3 days ago. You took a bullet for me." Mara sat down in the chair beside the bed, the one she had occupied for most of the past 36 hours. "People don't owe other people their whole lives for one thing." "No. But some things create obligations you don't measure in proportion. You moved when you could have stayed down. You made a decision alone without backup, without any reason to believe it would be worth it." She leaned forward. "That's not a small thing. That's the kind of thing I build around." He looked at her for a long time, reading her the way he had learned to read people on the street, looking for the gap between what they said and what they meant. Looking for the tell that indicated this was temporary, that the fine print would appear when the circumstances changed. Apparently, he did not find it. "Okay," he said. 2 hours later, Mara pulled up to a house in the Northeast Heights where a woman named Sandra Keene ran short-term foster placements with the careful competence of someone who had been doing it long enough to manage both children in crisis without losing her equilibrium. Callum was in the passenger seat, cleared for short travel, moving carefully, holding himself with the particular self-containment of someone who had decided that showing pain was a resource expenditure he was not prepared to make. Sable came out of the front door before the car fully stopped. 7 years old and moving with the specific urgency of someone who had been waiting and was not going to waste a single second of the arrival on decorum. She crossed the front yard at a run and hit Mara. At the moment, Mara cleared the car door, and Mara caught her and absorbed the impact and held her while the tension in that small body released in stages. The particular unwinding of a child who had been holding herself together through an act of sustained will and had finally been given permission to stop. "I knew you'd come," Sable said into Mara's shoulder. "I told them. I said Grandma always comes." "Always," Mara said. She held her tighter for a moment, then sat her back and looked at her face, gap-toothed and bright-eyed and showing the specific evidence of several days of trying very hard to be braver than 7 years old required. "Always." Sable noticed Callum in the passenger seat, studied him with the direct curiosity of children who had not yet learned to make their interest less visible. "Who's that? Someone special." Mara kept her hand on Sable's shoulder. "His name is Callum. He's the reason I'm here right now." Sable took in Callum's careful movements as he got out of the car, the edge of bandaging visible at his collar, the way he held his left side without quite touching it. "You got hurt," she said. "Yeah." Callum said it simply without drama. "For Grandma, yeah." Sable considered this with the gravity that 7-year-olds brought to things that mattered. Then she held out her hand in the formal way that children sometimes did when they sensed the moment required ceremony. "I'm Sable. Thank you for keeping her safe." Callum shook her hand. The gesture was slightly awkward the way genuine things sometimes were. I'm Callum. Do you have any family? He paused. A sister. Her name is Iris. We're twins. Sable's eyes widened slightly. Is she nice? I think so. I haven't seen her in a while. Sable considered this with the same gravity she had given everything else. Maybe you can bring her to meet us sometime. Callum looked at Mara. Yeah, he said. Maybe soon. They drove back to the house that Ethan had tried to inherit that Roy had built, that had been the site of a custody battle and a murder plot, and was now going to have to expand its understanding of what it contained. Three people where there had been one, which changed the acoustics of every room in ways that were not unpleasant. Sable talked through the entire drive, filling Callum in on the full account of the foster placement with the thoroughness of someone who had been containing a large backlog of narration and had finally found the right audience for it. Callum listened, asked occasional questions, smiled twice, which Mara counted. Garrett called as they pulled into the driveway. Ethan is looking at life without parole. DA says the recording of him ordering harm to Callum is what makes it airtight. Voss is cooperating fully. 15 years with possibility of parole in 10 if he stays cooperative. He took the deal before the ink was dry. Good. Callum's paperwork. Emergency guardianship is filed. You'll have temporary custody by end of week, permanent by end of month if all goes as expected. Mara looked at Callum. You okay with that living here? Being part of this? Callum thought about the alternatives. The street, the cold, the hunger, the fear that never fully switched off. Thought about Iris in Santa Fe still waiting. Yeah, he said. I'm okay with it. That night, Mara made dinner at the kitchen table. Real food cooked from actual ingredients, the kind of meal that required more than one pot, and had a smell that moved through the house before the food did. Sable talked through most of it, managing to give Callum a fairly comprehensive overview of her entire life while consuming an impressive amount of food. Callum ate with the careful attention of someone for whom food had been unreliable long enough that it still deserved full presence. After dinner, Mara set her phone on the table. Nora has the arrangement made, she said. Tomorrow we drive to Santa Fe. We bring Iris home. Callum set down his fork. What if she doesn't remember me? It's been 3 years. Then you remind her. Mara said it simply without ceremony, the way you stated something you were certain of. You show her that brothers who disappear sometimes come back, that promises can be remade. She paused. Family isn't only blood. It's who shows up when it matters. You know that better than most people. Sable appeared from the living room with a blanket and a stuffed bear that she had apparently decided Callum needed. You can sleep in the spare room. Grandma says you're going to stay. She held out the blanket and the bear with the complete confidence of someone who had already made a decision and was simply informing him of it. That makes you family. Family shares blankets. Callum took the offered items, felt the specific weight of 7 years old deciding he belonged. Thank you, he said. He slept in a real bed for the first time in months, door locked from the inside because old habits required time to change, but warm and fed, and with people in the next rooms who would notice if something went wrong. The specific safety of that, the noticing, was something he had not had in so long that his body took several hours to believe it enough to rest. But eventually it believed. Eventually it did. The drive to Santa Fe took 2 hours. Mara behind the wheel, Callum in the passenger seat with his hands in the jacket pockets, and everything he wanted to say to Iris arranged and rearranged in his head. Sable in the back asking questions that nobody had complete answers for. What if she doesn't like me, Sable asked. Her voice was small in the way it got when she was actually worried about something underneath the question she was asking. She'll like you, Callum said. More hope than certainty, but honest. What if she's scared? Then we give her time. Mara kept her eyes on the road. You can't rush someone into feeling safe. You just have to keep showing up until they believe you're going to keep showing up. Sable was quiet for a moment, processing this with the thoroughness she brought to everything. Then I kept believing you were going to show up, even when the other kids in the house said maybe you weren't coming. I kept believing. Mara's hands tightened slightly on the wheel. I know you did, baby. I know. Nora had spoken with Iris's current foster mother, Ruth Hayden, the previous afternoon, told her what was coming. Ruth had called back 20 minutes later to say that Iris had been packed since yesterday morning, sitting by the window with her backpack on her lap, watching the driveway. She's been waiting, Nora had told Callum. Kids don't let go of that kind of thing. Ruth Hayden met them at the door of a small house on a quiet street with mature cottonwood trees dropping their last leaves in the October wind. 60-something kind eyes behind reading glasses, the careful weariness of someone who had fostered enough children to know that love was often not sufficient to repair what the world had broken, but who gave it anyway because the alternative was not giving it, which was worse. She's upstairs, Hayden said. She's been asking me every 10 minutes if you were real, whether this was going to happen or whether it was another thing that was going to fall through. Callum's chest tightened. Can I see her? Go ahead. Second door on the right. He climbed the stairs slowly. Each step felt like moving towards something that could either break him or put him back together, depending entirely on what happened in the next few minutes. The door was half open. He knocked anyway, giving her time to decide. Come in. Her voice 3 years older, harder at the edges, but still completely and unmistakably Iris. He pushed the door open. She was sitting on the bed with the posture of someone who had learned to hold herself at a slight distance from the world, ready to step back at any moment. 11 years old now, hair longer than he remembered, wearing a jacket over a sweater because the room was cold or because she had been ready to leave since yesterday morning. Eyes that had the particular quality of eyes that had been watching for a long time for signs of what was coming and had not always liked what they found. A small backpack sat at her feet. Everything she owned ready to move again because moving was what foster kids did. 6 placements in 3 years had taught her that permanence was a word adults used before they changed the definition of it. They looked at each other, brother and sister separated by 3 years and 1,000 miles of things that had happened to each of them while the other was not there. Twins who had come into the world 4 minutes apart and had spent the subsequent 3 years on opposite sides of a distance that had nothing to do with geography. You got tall, Iris said finally. You got old, Callum said. A smile crossed her face, brief, like she had forgotten the exact muscle memory for it and had to work to locate it. But it was there. You said you'd come back for me. I know. He said it without flinching. I'm sorry it took this long. 3 years isn't long, she said. Her voice carried no accusation, just the plain fact, the way that time moved differently for children, especially children who had been waiting in a series of houses that did not belong to them for someone who had promised to return. It's forever. I couldn't before. He met her eyes. But I can now, and I'm not leaving without you. He paused. Unless you don't want to come. That's your choice. I'm not the system. I'm not going to decide for you. Iris studied him the way she used to when they were small. The look she had given him when she was trying to determine whether something he said was true or whether it was the kind of thing people said because it was easier than the alternative. She had always been better at reading him than he was at hiding things from her. Nora said you got shot. Said you saved someone's grandmother. Yeah. Why? He thought about how to answer that honestly in a way that was true to what had actually happened inside him and not just a story that made sense from the outside. Because I was tired of standing still. Tired of being the kid who stood in the kitchen and did nothing. He looked at her. I wanted to do something right for once. And I did. Did it work? Are you different now? He considered the question the way it deserved to be considered without rushing to an answer that would make either of them feel better. I don't know yet, but I have people now. A grandmother who keeps promises. A little girl who shares blankets with strangers. He stopped. And a sister I've been looking for since the day they took you away. If you'll come. Iris picked up the backpack, held it the way she had probably been holding it since yesterday morning, like a shield and a preparation simultaneously, like something that could be both protection and readiness depending on what the next hour decided. Where Albuquerque, Mara's house, she has emergency guardianship papers for both of us. We'd be together. He watched her face. You and me, same house, same people, together. What if it doesn't work? Her voice was quiet but direct. What if she decides we're too much trouble? What if something changes? Callum understood the fear, had felt it himself the night before lying in the spare room with the locked door and the borrowed blanket, and the small, persistent voice that kept suggesting permanence was a thing adults promise before they change their minds. Then we figure it out together, he said. But Mara's not like the others. She called in something called the sacred oath for me. 940 people showed up to a hospital parking lot because I took a bullet for her. That's the kind of person she is, the kind who keeps the hard promises. Iris was quiet for a moment, working through it at her own pace, not letting herself be rushed. Is Sable nice? Yeah, she talks constantly. She already decided you're going to love motorcycles. Iris looked at him sideways. Is that normal for her, pretty much? Something shifted in her face, not quite a smile, but moving in that direction. She stood, adjusted the backpack straps with the practiced motion of someone who had worn a backpack through 6 different houses and knew exactly how to balance it. They went downstairs together, Iris moving with the careful control of someone who had learned that showing anticipation created exposure to disappointment. But when she reached the bottom of the stairs and saw Sable standing by the front door, something adjusted in the careful distance she kept between herself and new situations. 7-year-old certainty met 11-year-old caution. Sable smiled the way she always smiled, wide and genuine, and completely unaware that some people needed time to trust smiles. Iris looked at it and seemed to be deciding what to do with it. You're Iris. Sable said it like confirming something she already knew. Callum talks about you. I'm Sable. Do you like motorcycles because Grandma has one and it's really loud but also kind of amazing, and maybe she'll let us ride sometime? Iris blinked, looked at Callum for context. She's always like this, he said. I like motorcycles, Iris said quietly. I've never been on one. Then we'll fix that, Mara said from behind Sable. She stepped forward, not crowding, giving Iris the space to take in the information at her own pace. Mara understood that space was not indifference. It was respect. There was a difference, and Iris, who had spent 3 years learning to read the difference in unfamiliar adults, would know it. I'm Mara. I have a house with 2 spare rooms and a kitchen with actual food in it. She paused. The only promise I'm making right now is this. You're under protection. Same as Callum. Same as Sable. Nobody touches you without going through us first. How many? Iris asked. Her voice was careful. Not hostile, just careful. 940, Sable said. Give or take. Grandma says it depends on the day. Mara's mouth curved slightly. It's a lot to explain. Short version is that you matter now. Both of you. And we don't let go of people who matter. She held Iris's eyes for a moment. There isn't a category for what happens after that, except you're in, and that doesn't come with an expiration date. Ruth Hayden appeared with the paperwork. Transfer documents. Temporary guardianship signatures. The official stamps that transformed Iris from another foster placement into something with a different name. She handed Mara a folder: medical records, school transcripts, therapy notes, the accumulated documentation of 3 years of a child moving through a system that processed her without seeing her. She'll test you, Hayden said quietly to Mara. Each move made trusting harder. She'll push to see if you'll give up. I won't. Everyone says that. I'm not everyone. They drove back to Albuquerque with 2 kids in the back seat. Sable filled the silence with her usual comprehensive narration of everything she found interesting about the world. Iris listened occasionally, made a small sound that might have been amusement, said very little, watched the desert scroll past the window, and tried to decide what she believed about any of this. Callum watched his sister in the passenger side mirror, saw the walls she had built through 6 different placements and 3 years of learning that getting attached created exposure to loss. Recognized the walls because he had built versions of the same ones. Knew that taking them down was a matter of time and proof and not leaving. The house felt different with 4 people in it. Fuller, more complicated, more like something that was in the process of becoming rather than something that already was. Mara showed Iris the spare room. Plain walls, empty dresser, clean sheets. Nothing personal, because personal reminded a foster family that children move through that nothing was supposed to last. You can decorate however you want, Mara said. Paint the walls, hang whatever you like. Make it yours. You're not a guest. You live here now. Iris set her backpack on the bed, did not unpack it. How long? As long as you want. Mara sat on the edge of the bed, not crowding, giving her room. I filed for permanent guardianship. If it goes through, you're here until you're ready to be somewhere else. On your terms. People always say permanent. Iris's voice was flat in the way that flat voices were protecting something underneath that was not flat at all. Then something changes. Yeah, they do. Mara did not argue with it, did not try to convince her otherwise. I'm not going to promise nothing will ever be hard. I can promise I won't quit on you. Won't send you back because you're too much work or too complicated or because I decided something else was more important. She paused. You're Callum's sister. He saved my life. That makes you family by extension. And I take family seriously. That's a strange reason to want kids. Most reasons people want kids are strange if you think about them honestly. Mara stood. Dinner's at 6. Callum knows where the kitchen is. If you need anything, ask. If you need space, take it. She left. Gave Iris the room and the silence and the privacy to process at her own speed, which was the most respectful thing she could have offered, and which Iris, after 3 years of reading adults, recognized immediately as something different from indifference. Callum found her an hour later still sitting on the bed, backpack unopened, working through the situation at the pace it required. You don't have to unpack, he said from the doorway. Not until you're ready. What if I'm never ready? Then you live out of the backpack. But at least you do it here. He paused. That's different from doing it somewhere else. Iris looked at him. Really looked the way she used to when they were small, and she was deciding whether to trust something he said. He let her look. Had nothing to hide from it. Did it hurt getting shot? Yeah. Was it worth it? He thought about the specific answer. About Mara and Sable and 940 people who had shown up for a boy they had never met. About sitting here in this room with his sister for the first time in 3 years. About the feeling of not being frozen anymore. Yeah, he said. It was worth it. 6 months passed the way time passed when something was finally working. Not dramatically, not without difficulty, but forward. The way seasons moved insistently and with results that accumulated before you noticed they were accumulating. Callum's stitches came out at the 2-week mark. The wound became a scar visible above the waistline. When he reached for things, a permanent record of the night he stopped being invisible. He worked at Garrett's garage 3 days a week, learning mechanics with the focused attention of someone who had found something he was good at and wanted to understand more deeply. The older mechanic stopped explaining things more than once. They started asking his opinion on small problems, and then on larger ones, and he discovered that 3 months of keeping himself alive on the street had taught him a certain practical intelligence about systems and failures, and what happened when parts were asked to do more than they were designed for. Iris was harder. She tested the boundaries the way children did when they needed to know whether the boundaries were real or decorative. Stayed out past the time Mara had set. Skipped school twice in October. Told Mara once in a voice calibrated to wound that she was not a real family and did not get to tell her what to do. Mara said okay, made dinner, did not revise the terms. Iris came home early the next day without explanation. The walls came down in pieces over months. A morning Iris said something quietly funny at the breakfast table and laughed at Mara's response and seemed briefly startled by her own laughter, as if she had forgotten she still had it in her. An afternoon when she and Callum sat in the kitchen for an hour and a half and talked about things Mara could not hear from the other room, but that had the sound of something being repaired rather than built from scratch. A Sunday when Sable climbed into Iris's bed at 7 in the morning because of a bad dream, and Iris did not tell her to leave. And when Mara looked in an hour later, both of them were asleep. Ethan's trial happened in month 4. Callum testified. His voice in the courtroom was steady in a way that had cost him considerably more than it showed the controlled steadiness of someone who had decided that what he was doing mattered more than how he felt while doing it. Iris sat in the gallery with Mara's hand in hers. Sable was with a neighbor too young for the specifics, but old enough to understand that something important was being decided. The jury took 90 minutes, life without the possibility of parole. The judge thanked Callum on the record for his courage. Callum nodded and did not say that courage from the inside felt mostly like fear that had decided to move anyway, that the difference between cowardice and bravery was often just a question of which direction the fear sent you. Voss's plea processed in month 5. 15 years with possibility of parole in 10 in exchange for complete cooperation. He took it without negotiation. His testimony was comprehensive and precise. The last Callum heard, he was in a facility in central New Mexico and had asked for grief counseling, which the institution had provided. Callum thought about that sometimes in the particular way you thought about things that didn't resolve neatly, didn't turn into clean lessons or clear endings. Voss had made choices that could not be undone. He was also a man who had loved a daughter named Vanessa and was still carrying her. Those two things existed at the same time and did not cancel each other out. On a Saturday in late spring, Garrett called. Tomorrow, he said. Desert outside the city. Dawn. Mara knew what that meant. She told Callum and Iris and Sable at dinner. Tomorrow we're meeting the full brotherhood. There's a ceremony, a formal acknowledgement of what happened 6 months ago and what it means. Do we have to go? Iris asked. Her voice was careful in the way it still got sometimes when something mattered more than she wanted to show, when she was trying to manage the distance between wanting something and allowing herself to want it. No, Mara said. But I'd like you to. This is family now. All of them. That's a lot of people who showed up for you both, and they'd like to see who they showed up for. That's a lot of family, Iris said. It is. Mara looked at her steadily without pushing. But they show up when it matters. That's the only definition that actually counts. The desert was already holding the first warmth of morning when they arrived before dawn. The sky moving from black to deep blue to the first thin line of gold along the eastern horizon. 940 motorcycles arranged in precise rows on the flat ground west of the city, their chrome catching the early light, men and women standing beside them with the patience of people who had ridden through the night because one of their own had called and the code said you came. A bonfire burned in the center large enough to be visible from a distance. Old tradition. Fire as witness. Fire as the element that transformed one thing into another and did not apologize for what it consumed in the process. Garrett stood beside it in his full chapter gear. He raised one hand, and the assembled voices cut off simultaneously that particular silence of a large crowd, choosing quiet at the same moment, which was its own kind of sound. Brothers and sisters, his voice carried without effort across the desert morning. We gather to honor something that began 6 months ago in a parking lot in the middle of the night when everything was at stake, and the person who stepped in was an 11-year-old boy with nothing to gain and a great deal to lose. He told it the way it had happened, not every detail but the shape of it, the essential weight of it. A grandmother at risk, a boy who had been invisible to everyone, the choice to move when every calculation said stay down, the oath that followed. The 6 months of following through which was the harder and less dramatic part, but the part that actually determined what the night had meant. He turned to Mara, pulled a patch from inside his jacket. Black leather embroidered gold thread, a lion's head fierce and detailed looking directly forward. Beneath it 2 words, Grandmother Lion, Mara Riker. Garrett's voice was formal with the formality of ritual of language that had been used this way before, and meant something specific because of all the times it had been used before and all the weight those uses had left behind. You were already one of us. Tonight we name what you became. He held the patch out. She turned. Let him sew it onto the back of her vest, each stitch permanent, each one adding weight that was not quite physical, but was real in the way that real things were real. The way the code was real, the way the oath was real, the way 940 people standing in a desert at dawn was real. When he finished, she faced the assembly. 940 people, some she had known for decades, some she was seeing for the first time, all standing in the same early light wearing the same code. They tried to take everything she said. Her voice carried across the desert without effort. My granddaughter, my life. My own son looked at me and calculated that I was worth more gone than present. She let that sit for a moment. Let the desert hold it. They were wrong about the most important thing. She looked at Callum. I had an 11-year-old boy who decided that one loud moment was worth more than another year of silence. And everything after that, Sable and Iris and all of it, is what that one decision made possible. Garrett turned to Callum. Another patch, silver thread, the same lion's head. Beneath it, Lionheart. Protected. Callum Merritt. Garrett said the name clearly in the particular way of someone who understood what it meant to make a name real in front of witnesses, to say it in a way that gave it weight and location in the world. 11 years old, invisible to the world, failed by every system designed to see him. You ran toward a gun for a stranger. You held your nerve in a warehouse when it would have been easier not to. You carried the oath out under circumstances that would have stopped most adults. He held the patch out. Callum took it. Mara helped him turn. She sewed it onto the denim jacket, the one that had belonged to Nora's brother, the one that was now something different, the one that was his. Each stitch the same deliberate permanence as the ones on her own vest, as the ones Garrett had just put into the new patch on her back. The assembly stood. 940 people raised their hands to their chests in the salute reserved for moments that required acknowledgement without performance. Silent. Deliberate. Real. The kind of real that accumulated over years of being meant and could not be manufactured in the moment. Then Garrett turned to Iris. She was standing slightly behind Callum with the careful readiness of someone who had learned to be prepared for most things to be difficult. Garrett's voice was quieter when he spoke to her, the tone adjusted for someone who needed a different kind of space than the ceremony had been using. Iris Merritt, you didn't choose any of this. Didn't choose your brother or what he did or to be brought into this circle because of it. But your brother fought to bring you here. And Mara Riker opened a door. That makes you family, and we don't have exceptions to what family means. He held out a small patch. Under protection. Family. Iris looked at it, looked at Callum, at Mara, at Sable standing beside Mara with the complete confidence of someone who had decided at age 7 that the world was fundamentally good and had spent the 2 years since collecting evidence to support that conclusion. She took the patch, let Mara sew it onto the jacket she had arrived in Santa Fe, with the jacket she had worn through 6 different placements, the jacket that was starting to feel less like something she wore while passing through, and more like something that belonged to someone who stayed. The assembly responded with sound. Voices in the deep sustained note of 940 people who had ridden through the night because someone said someone mattered, and who were now witnessing what that mattering had made, which was this: 4 people standing in the desert at dawn, being officially recognized as something that had not existed 6 months ago and would not stop existing now. Mara stood at the edge of the bonfire later when the food had been consumed and the fire had settled into a sustained glow, watching her assembled family move through the morning. Sable collecting stories and nicknames with the complete confidence of someone who had never had reason to distrust a room. Iris talking quietly with Nora, showing her something on her phone, the beginning of something that looked like trust being extended carefully, one small increment at a time. Callum at the fire itself, watching the flames, not managing whatever he was processing, just letting it be there and be what it was. She went to stand beside him. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The parking lot," he said. "The moment right before I ran." He was quiet for a moment. "I keep thinking about what it felt like, because it didn't feel like courage. It just felt like fear, like being completely certain something terrible was about to happen and deciding to do it anyway. That's most of what courage actually is. What's the rest?" She looked at the desert, at the stars that were beginning to fade as the sky lightened toward full morning, at the assembly of 940 people who had built their lives around a code that said, you showed up for people who needed it, and you did not calculate whether the cost was worth it first. The rest is what you do the day after, she said. And the day after that, the parking lot was one night. Everything after it, that's the actual thing. That's who you are. Callum was quiet for a while, watching the fire do what fire did, transforming whatever it was given into something else entirely. I've been thinking about starting something, he said. A program for kids on the street, kids like I was, teaching them what I learned. How to read situations, how to find real help when they need it, how to ask for it without losing the pride that kept them alive long enough to ask. He looked at her sideways. I know I'm 11, and adults usually tell 11-year-olds to focus on school. You learned everything you know about surviving by doing it. Mara said it plainly without hedging. That's not something a classroom produces. If you've got an idea that comes from knowing something the hard way, I think you take it seriously. He looked at her. I could use help building it. I have 940 people who showed up because I called. She looked at him. I think we can find some resources. 18 months after the ceremony, the Grandmother Lion Project had helped its 119th family. An elderly woman in Taos fighting her adult son for custody of twin granddaughters. A grandfather in Farmington navigating legal complications that had arrived in his life without invitation and showed no signs of leaving without help. Families in the specific impossible situations that arose when the law treated love as less relevant than paperwork and presence as less meaningful than rights. When systems designed to protect people became the mechanism by which they were threatened. The program worked because it combined things that did not usually come together. Legal aid funded by the Brotherhood, staffed by attorneys who had found in the organization something their degrees alone had not given them. Practical protection that operated as a deterrent, the kind of presence that changed calculations before anything needed to be said. A network that reached across 7 states and could put people on site within hours when a situation required bodies in a room. And a woman named Mara Riker, who had learned the hard way that showing up was the only thing that actually counted, and who had built everything since around that single fact. Callum was 13 now, still in school, which had turned out to suit him better than he would have predicted, partly because consistent sleep and reliable food changed what his brain could do, and partly because he had discovered that the skills he had developed surviving 3 months on the street translated into a particular kind of classroom intelligence. He saw systems. He saw which parts were under stress. He saw what information was missing and why that mattered. The teachers who noticed had started giving him harder problems. He stayed at the garage 3 days a week, and the program for street kids had its second cohort running 12 young people who came twice a week to a space Garrett had cleared at the clubhouse, learning the skills that Callum had learned the expensive way, in a room where the learning cost them nothing except attention. Iris had won second place in a statewide student art competition, which she had described as meaningless and then discussed at considerable length for 3 days, examining every angle of why second place had been awarded instead of first, and what that said about the judging criteria and whether the criteria were even measuring the right things. She was applying to a summer arts program in Santa Fe with the careful optimism of someone who had decided that wanting things was worth the risk of not getting them, which was a decision that had cost her something to make, and that Mara recognized as one of the more significant things that had happened in the house over the past year and a half. Sable was 9. Her junior chapter of the Grandmother Lion Project at her school had 17 active members and had recently taken on its first case, a classmate's grandmother who was having difficulty with a landlord, which Sable had described to Mara in exhaustive detail as a problem that had a solution and therefore needed to be solved, which was exactly the right way to think about it. She had asked Mara twice when she would get a road name and received the same answer both times. When you earn one. She was working on it with the same systematic intensity she brought to everything else. On a Thursday evening in late autumn, Mara's phone rang with an unknown number. Ms. Riker, Officer Dana Mercer Gallup, PD. We've got a situation. A 71-year-old woman, her adult son is trying to force her to sign over power of attorney threatening her. She's asking for the Grandmother Lion Project by name. Says she heard you help people in situations like this. Mara looked at the clock. 3-hour drive. Early morning tomorrow. A reasonable argument for calling someone closer and getting some sleep. I'll be there in 3 hours, she said. Keep her safe until I arrive. She hung up. 4 faces looked at her from the kitchen table and the couch. Got a call, she said. Woman in Gallup needs help. Iris closed her sketchbook with the deliberateness of someone making a decision. The motion that meant the decision was already made, and the closing was just the formal acknowledgement of it. I'm coming. You have school tomorrow. I'm coming. Callum was already standing. Sable appeared from the living room with her jacket moving with the complete confidence of someone who had already decided and was simply waiting for the adults to catch up. Mara looked at them. This specific collection of people that violence and circumstance and the stubborn refusal to give up had assembled into something that functioned as a family because it was one, because they had chosen it and kept choosing it on every ordinary day between the extraordinary ones. All right, she said. Let's show her she's not alone. They drove through the desert in the dark stars overhead, doing their ancient, indifferent work. The car full of the warmth and noise and the particular sound of people who had chosen each other being in a vehicle together at an inconvenient hour for a reason that mattered, which was the best version of what a family could sound like. An elderly woman named Ruth Calloway was sitting in her own living room in a house she had owned for 40 years when they arrived. Gray hair and a neat bun flannel robe, eyes fierce despite the fear that had been in them when the officer found her. Her son stood across the room with the reasonable, patient voice of someone who had rehearsed the conversation and mistaken access to legal language for being right about what the legal language was for. My name is Mara Riker. Mara walked through the door that Officer Mercer opened. Grandmother Lion Project. Mrs. Calloway asked for us. She looked at the son. This conversation is over for tonight. He looked at her vest, at Callum and Iris, and Sable standing behind her, at something in Mara's face that communicated a set of facts about the available options more efficiently than words would have. This is a family matter. She's your mother. Mara held his eyes until he looked away. Start treating her like family or explain to the people coming why you didn't. He left, not gracefully, but he left. 30 motorcycles arrived 40 minutes later. Not 900, but enough. They parked in formation on the street outside Ruth Calloway's house and made the specific statement that their presence was designed to make, which was that the woman inside now had people willing to show up at midnight on a Thursday, and that this changed the relevant calculations significantly, and that whoever had been counting on her isolation to make his plan work had miscounted. Callum helped Ruth make coffee for the riders who had come through the night. Iris documented everything with the camera she had started carrying building records of the program's work, creating the visual archive that would eventually become the evidence of what the project had done and who it had reached. Sable sat with Ruth and talked about school and art and the things that 9-year-olds found interesting, which was the purest form of comfort they had come to offer, because it made the person who had been terrified feel like someone ordinary enough to have normal conversations with, which was its own kind of restoration. As dawn painted the desert gold and pink through Ruth Calloway's living room windows, Mara sat beside her on the couch while Ruth signed nothing and the sun did not return, and the motorcycles held their quiet formation outside like a promise made visible. "Why did you come?" Ruth asked. "It's the middle of the night. You don't know me." "Because someone helped me once," Mara said, "and I decided that was worth passing forward." Ruth looked at her hands. "He's my son. I didn't want to believe he would do this." "I know." Mara said it without bitterness. The bitterness had resolved over 18 months into something simpler and harder, something she could carry without it weighing her down. Not everyone who should protect us does. But we're not alone in that, and we don't have to face it like we are. Ruth was quiet for a while. Then she looked toward the window, toward where Callum was talking with one of the riders in the early morning light, gesturing with his hands the way he did when he was explaining something he cared about, when the idea was large enough that words alone weren't sufficient, and his whole body got involved in communicating it. "That boy," Ruth said, "he looks like someone who finally stopped bracing for the next thing." He's getting there, Mara said. They both are. On the drive back to Albuquerque, Sable fell asleep against Iris's shoulder. Iris let her stay there, her own head tilted slightly against the window, watching the desert go by in the morning light, with the expression she sometimes had now, not wary, not waiting for something to go wrong, just present, just watching. Callum rode in the front seat, quiet in the way he got quiet when something was settling in him, finding its place among the other things he carried. Does it stop being hard, he asked. No, Mara said. She kept her eyes on the road. But you stop being alone in it. That's the part that changes. He was quiet for a moment, watching the desert pass. Then I found something in the library last week. A quote. He paused. It said the most radical thing any of us can do is to stay present to what is actually happening in our own lives. She thought about that. Where's it from? I don't know. It wasn't attributed, just written on the wall of the reading room. She thought about radical presence, about the parking lot and what it had taken to be present in it rather than somewhere safer in his own head, about the warehouse and what it had cost Callum to stay in the room, stay in the conversation, stay with what was actually happening, rather than retreating into the paralysis that had defined 3 years of his life. About Iris asleep against Sable in the back seat, her head tilted at an angle that suggested she had finally stopped holding herself at a slight distance from everything, even in sleep. About 940 people who had ridden through the night because one of their own called, and the code said you came, which was itself a form of radical presence. The decision to be where you were needed instead of where it was comfortable. That sounds right, she said. The miles ran under them. The city appeared on the horizon, the familiar scatter of lights against the desert dark. Behind them, the desert went on in both directions, full of truck stops and rest areas, and all the spaces where the lost and the weary paused between one place and another, looking for something that might hold them long enough to catch their breath. Some of them found it. That was the part nobody told you in advance, that sometimes in the spaces between everywhere you were supposed to be, in the dark parts between where you started and where you were going, in the parking lots and the diner booths and the gaps between dumpsters where you hid because the world had not yet given you anywhere better to be, you found the thing that changed what came after. Not because the world decided to be kind, not because the system worked, but because someone looked at the right moment and saw what was actually there. A boy behind a dumpster had seen something and screamed instead of staying silent. That was where all of this had come from. One voice in the dark. One choice to move when every calculation said stay down. One decision to be the version of himself he had wanted to be for 3 years, even if it cost him everything he had. It had cost him a bullet and given him a family. Mara had done the arithmetic on that many times in 18 months, and always arrived at the same place. Some debts could not be repaid proportionally. Some things created obligations that exceeded any reasonable measure of what was owed. The only thing you could do with that kind of debt was to make it mean something, to build something out of it that lasted longer than the moment that created it and reached further than either of them could see from where they were standing. She had been building. They had all been building, each in the specific way that their specific history had given them the tools for. Callum with his street knowledge and his ability to see what people needed before they knew how to ask for it, the diagnostic intelligence of someone who had survived by reading situations correctly. Iris with her art and the particular way she had of making invisible things visible, of finding the image that held the truth that words kept sliding off of. Sable with her complete certainty that the world was good and her apparently limitless capacity for making people feel seen without making them feel watched, which was rarer than it sounded. And Mara with everything she had learned in 58 years of fighting for the people she loved and refusing to stop even when the odds suggested she should, with the particular stubbornness of someone who had decided a long time ago that giving up was not something she was willing to add to her list of available options. None of it had been clean. None of it had been the way you would plan it from a safe distance, with complete information and the luxury of choosing your risks in advance. It had been messy and terrifying, and sometimes it had nearly gone wrong in ways she could not think about too directly. Even now, ways that involve Callum on a warehouse floor and Sable in a stranger's house, and the 72-hour clock running down toward a courtroom that might have decided everything differently. But it had worked, and it was still working. She pulled into the driveway. Sable stirred. Iris stretched and straightened and looked around with the brief disorientation of someone waking in a car, then recognized where they were and settled back into herself. Callum sat up from where he had been leaning against the window, watching the desert go by in the last of the dark. Home, Mara said. The word landed the way it had started to land over the past months, not as a neutral descriptor of a physical location, but as something with weight, with meaning accumulated through daily practice, through dinner at 6 and coffee in the morning, and the sound of 4 people moving through rooms that had been built for fewer and had expanded to hold them all. Through locked doors that were slowly unlocking, through walls that were coming down one brick at a time because nobody was pushing on them and nobody was leaving. They went inside. Mara started coffee. Callum sat at the kitchen table and opened a school bag with the ease of someone who had made peace with the fact that learning things was worth the time it took. Iris set her camera on the counter and started reviewing the photos from the night, selecting the ones that had caught something true, deleting the ones that hadn't, making the quiet editorial decisions that were themselves a form of seeing. Sable appeared with a very specific request about breakfast that had clearly been developing in her mind during the drive home, and that she presented with the thoroughness of someone who had thought it through and considered it settled. Outside, the morning was fully underway, the desert going gold and ordinary in the way that mornings did when the crisis had passed, and what remained was just the life that had to be lived in the aftermath of it. The daily work of being present to what was actually happening, which was this 4 people in a kitchen in Albuquerque doing the unremarkable things that unremarkable mornings required, which were also the things that made it real. Mara poured the coffee, set a cup in front of Callum, sat down across from him. He looked up from his school bag. "You okay?" "Yeah." She meant it. He could see that she meant it, had learned to read the difference between the version she offered when she was managing something and the version that just was. Good. She wrapped both hands around her mug heat through ceramic grounding and reeled the same sensation that had anchored her in the truck stop diner 18 months ago, when the night was just beginning and she did not yet know what it would cost or what it would build or who would be sitting across from her on the other side of all of it. "Drink your coffee, then get to school." He drank his coffee. Then he went to school. She watched him go from the window, watched him walk down the street in the denim jacket with the patch on the back, moving forward in the unhurried way of someone who had somewhere to be, and knew it, who had people expecting him, and knew that too, who had been invisible to the world for 3 months and had announced himself in the loudest possible way and survived it and built something from it and was still building. One voice in the dark, one choice to move. Everything after that was just honoring it.